They tried to cut my fence. Not just any fence, my land's last line of defense. When two HOA security guards showed up with bolt cutters, I didn't just stand there. I hit the switch. 9,000 volts. The kind that sends a message. They thought they could intimidate me into selling, but they had no idea what they were messing with. By the time they dragged me into court, they were the ones on their knees begging for mercy. And what happened next? Well, that's where things took a turn they didn't see coming. Evan Wells wasn't the type of man who introduced himself with a handshake. No, he walked into every room like it was his, wearing that smile that always seemed 1 inch too tight. As president of the Clear Ridge Heights HOA, he believed everything, every inch of land, every rule, belonged to him. And my fence. It was a direct challenge to that belief. It started with a letter, one of those polished, high and mighty kinds, claiming my fence violated their neighborhood aesthetics. They didn't care about the land. They cared about control. A piece of paper wasn't enough for Evan. So when he showed up in person, his first words were smooth, but loaded with an unspoken threat. "Let's work something out, Jack. Work something out." The offer was clear. Sell my land. I could almost see the dollar signs in his eyes. He was trying to buy me off, smooth-talk me into giving up something that wasn't for sale. I turned him down, of course. But Evan didn't back off. He wasn't used to hearing no. Instead, he shifted tactics. This wasn't just about fences anymore. It was about power land and the belief that in his world, money and authority could push anyone into submission. But what Evan didn't know was that I wasn't the type to be intimidated by a man in a suit. He was playing a game, one he hadn't even realized he was about to lose. I didn't choose this life. It chose me. This land has been in my family since 1928, long before anyone thought of building cookie-cutter neighborhoods around here. My grandfather worked this land with his own 2 hands, every cedar post, every fence line, every acre. And when he passed it down to my father, who worked it through droughts, cattle sickness, and storms that tore half the barn down, I inherited not just a ranch, but a legacy. It was never about money, never about prestige. It was about hard work and a simple truth: this land, my land, was worth protecting. For most of my life, the world stayed at a comfortable distance. The town knew me, the sheriff knew me, and the real neighbors, people who actually respected the land, treated me like family. My daily routine was simple: wake up before the sun, check on the cattle, inspect the fences, and live with the quiet pride of knowing that every groove in the wood, every step on the soil was earned. But everything changed when Clear Ridge Heights started going up to the north of me. At first, I didn't care. It was just houses and lawns, people who thought they could turn the country into some neat little model of suburbia. I thought it was none of my business. My deed was older than their subdivision, and my land was as untamed as the land my grandfather had worked. Then came the road. A straight line cutting through what used to be a path for cattle to roam. They planted trees that couldn't survive Texas heat and put in houses that never quite fit. I knew deep down that something wasn't right. That old rancher's instinct kicked in, the kind that tells you when a storm's brewing, even when the sky's still clear. The fence needed an upgrade. Not to provoke, not to start a fight, but to draw a clean, clear line between my world and theirs. A line I wouldn't let anyone cross. I didn't know it yet, but that fence was going to be the beginning of something much bigger than just property lines. The first letter arrived on a Monday. It was sleek, polished, and looked official, but when I read the first line, I couldn't help but laugh. The Clear Ridge Heights HOA claimed that my newly installed fence was non-compliant with established neighborhood aesthetics. A fence non-compliant. I could almost hear Evan Wells laughing behind the paper. He didn't know me. Didn't know what it meant to be a carver, to work this land. But that didn't matter to him. The letter went on to explain that I was required to remove the visual obstruction within 30 days to maintain neighborhood harmony. Harmony. I nearly spit my coffee across the porch. I folded the letter and tossed it on the kitchen table, dismissing it like any piece of junk mail. My land was older than their subdivision. They didn't get to tell me what to do with it. 2 weeks passed without a word. The routine didn't change. The cows still grazed. The sun still rose over the cedar line. But something felt off. I kept seeing unfamiliar faces driving by, slowly, eyes on my fence, sometimes stopping for too long. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know someone's watching, even if you can't see them. Then one morning, the second letter arrived. This one wasn't polite. It wasn't even pretending to be. The envelope was thicker, the paper heavier. I opened it to find a formal violation notice complete with the HOA's official logo. Failure to respond constitutes non-compliance. It wasn't just about aesthetics anymore. They were pushing harder. They'd upped the stakes. Failure to remove the fence will result in legal action. I sat there for a moment, reading it twice, then laughed out loud. Evan Wells thought he could intimidate me. They were starting a war they didn't understand. I could see it now. This wasn't about rules or fences. This was about control. This was about them trying to push me off my land, trying to make me bend. But I wasn't bending. I dropped the letter and wrote a response. No fancy stationery, just a plain notebook page written in all caps. My land is not part of your HOA. I will not remove my fence. I attached a copy of my deed and a map showing the legal boundary. The county had a record older than the HOA, and I wasn't about to let some paper-pushing bureaucrats forget it. When I mailed it, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Maybe this would end it. But I knew deep down it wouldn't. A week later, the trespassers arrived. I was knee-deep in mud fixing an irrigation valve when Rex barked once. Just once, but it was sharp. I wiped my hands, pulled up my phone, and checked the security feed. 2 men in HOA polos were standing by my fence. One of them, tall and thin, was taking pictures. The other, a heavier man, was running his hands over the top rail like he owned the place. I watched, frozen. They weren't inspecting anything, they were scoping it out. The bigger man stepped forward, put one boot on the bottom beam, and started to climb over my fence. They were trespassing. This wasn't just a casual visit, it was an invasion. I didn't shout, didn't run out there. I just watched. My grandfather had taught me better than to confront a fool before gathering proof. I pulled the footage, saved it, and moved it to a folder I knew no one would find. But the next morning, as I walked the fence line after a windstorm, I found it. The wire cut clean, not frayed or broken by weather. It was done with a bolt cutter. The very same men from the day before had come back and made their move. That was when the line had been crossed. But that wasn't all. That's when I realized I had to go further. I'd been thinking about it for days, but I wasn't sure until I saw the damage with my own eyes. I needed to show the world that they couldn't just walk all over me. That's when I decided to upgrade the fence with a 9,000-volt agricultural electric fence. It wasn't just to keep them out. It was to send a message that couldn't be ignored. A loud, clear message that this land was mine and I wasn't afraid to protect it. I set it up with solar-powered energizers, high-tensile wire, and warning signs every 10 feet. When I flipped the switch and heard the low hum, I knew I was sending the HOA a signal they'd never forget. I wasn't going to let this slide. I called the sheriff's office. Officer Tanner showed up an hour later. He was a man I'd known since I was a kid, a good man who'd helped me with cattle issues before. When I handed him the footage, he didn't say a word. He just whistled low, shook his head, and said, "This is criminal trespass and property damage." Tanner knew as well as I did that this wasn't just about a fence. The HOA was trying to force me into submission, and they were using legal threats and intimidation to do it. Tanner promised to help me gather more evidence. He was going to handle the HOA, but I could tell that this wasn't going to end with a simple citation. The HOA wasn't backing off. They were escalating. But I had something they didn't evidence. And with that, I was ready to turn the tables. That night, I did something the HOA didn't see coming. I replaced part of the fence with a dummy wire. It wasn't dangerous, but it was clever. I rigged it to explode in a burst of neon orange dye, the kind that would cover everything in a wide radius. When they came back to cut it, they'd get a whole lot more than they bargained for. I watched the security feed at 12:47 a.m., the glow of the screen illuminating my face. There he was, the same man dressed in a hoodie this time, trying to cut through the fence again. He was moving slow, careful, thinking he was being sneaky. But he wasn't. The second he cut the wire, the dye pack exploded, covering him in bright orange. He stumbled back, cursing, slipping in the dirt. I saved the footage, and this time I made sure it was backed up. They'd just walked into my trap, and now I had them. The HOA was about to learn that I wasn't someone they could push around. The courtroom smelled like old paper and floor wax, and I could feel the weight of every inch of space as I stood there. This wasn't just any case, it was my case, my land, my legacy on the line. Daniel and I walked in heads high, the same confidence we had on the ranch. The Clear Ridge Heights HOA crowd was already seated stiff-backed and nervous. Evan Wells, their slick-haired president, had that smirk like he thought he had this in the bag. He had no idea what was coming. Judge Evelyn Hart entered small but commanding. She glanced at the room, then settled her gaze on me, sizing up the situation. She didn't need to say anything to know what had been going on. This wasn't just a dispute over a fence, it was a fight over power, over control. And today, it was going to end. Evan's attorney, a smooth talker named Kellerman, started with the usual spiel claiming my electric fence was dangerous and violated safety codes. But Daniel wasn't here for their theatrics. He stood up and addressed the judge calmly. "Your Honor, may we present our evidence in an orderly fashion?" With a nod from the judge, Daniel clicked the remote and up came the county map. He laid it out, showing my property line in green, the HOAs in red. The line was clear 50 feet of land between us. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my land. The judge looked at Evan. "So the HOA has no legal claim to this land." Evan's face paled. He stammered, "We believe there are discrepancies." Daniel didn't wait. He clicked to the next piece of evidence, a video of the HOA security guard creeping along my fence line, bolt cutters in hand. The moment he snipped the wire, the screen flashed bright orange as the dye pack exploded, covering him completely. The entire room froze. The officer who'd been caught in the act shrank back in his seat, his face turning red. The judge turned to him. "Is that your employee?" she asked. Evan faltered. "Yes, but—" Daniel cut him off. "This, Your Honor, is not an inspection. It's trespassing, property damage." The tension in the room escalated. But Daniel wasn't done. He pulled out a blueprint, an official sketch showing a road running through my land. A feeder road for a future development. It was dated 2 months before I received the first violation letter. "This is the true motive," Daniel said calmly. "They wanted my land for their road, not for aesthetics, for expansion." Evan's eyes darted, his mouth opening and closing, but he couldn't speak. The room was dead silent, the evidence against him undeniable. Then came the final blow. Daniel pulled out the audio recording. It was Evan's voice offering to buy my land, proposing a mutually beneficial deal, and trying to force me into selling. I stood tall, watching as the realization hit Evan hard. He wasn't just losing the case, he was being exposed for what he truly was, a man using his HOA position to try to steal my land. Judge Hart leaned forward, folding her glasses slowly. "Mr. Wells, you attempted to manipulate Mr. Carver into selling his land under false pretenses. This is premeditated fraud." Evan's face crumpled. The judge didn't wait for him to recover. She slammed the gavel down. "Mr. Carver, your fence is fully legal under the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Protection Act. The HOA has no jurisdiction. You are awarded $151 in damages, including legal fees and emotional distress." The room held its breath. The victory was mine, and Evan Wells knew it. The courthouse doors swung closed behind us as Daniel and I walked into the Texas heat. The weight of everything we'd just been through didn't hit me until I stepped into the sunlight. It was like the world had exhaled. Daniel slapped me on the back. "Well done, hermano." His smile was wide, but I could tell it wasn't just about winning a case. It was about standing up for what was right. I glanced around the dusty parking lot. The Clear Ridge Heights HOA crowd was already filing out, their heads down, trying to avoid eye contact. Evan Wells was nowhere to be seen. He'd already retreated, probably wondering how he could have been so damn sure he could win. "I guess that's that," I said, feeling the tension in my shoulders start to loosen. Daniel chuckled. "They'll try something else. But they're done. They'll never mess with you again." I nodded, but I didn't feel fully free yet. The storm wasn't quite over. Not until I made sure they stayed off my land for good. And there was one more thing I had to do. I drove back to the ranch, Rex jumping up into the truck bed beside me. By the time we pulled up to the porch, the phone was already ringing off the hook. A message from a rancher in Llano County, another from someone near Waco, a woman from the next county over asking how to protect her property from the same kind of threat. But there was one call that stood out above the rest. Harold Kim, a young rancher from just outside town. His voice was shaky when he spoke. "Mr. Carver, I think I need help." He sounded like I had months ago the same desperation, the same fear that he was about to lose everything. His family's land had been under threat by an HOA that kept pushing for more and more of his property, trying to intimidate him into selling. "I'm not sure what to do," he admitted, "but I can't let them take it." I told him to come over. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. This was bigger. It was about making sure this kind of thing didn't happen to anyone else. When Harold arrived that weekend, I showed him the fence line, the one that had made all the difference. Rex trotted beside us, a silent witness to the passing of the torch. "You ready for this?" I asked. He nodded, his eyes hardening with resolve. "I have to be." We spent the evening talking about the law, about the fight I had just won. I showed him how to draw a clear line, not just on a map, but in his mind. He wasn't just protecting land. He was protecting everything his family had worked for. That night, an idea started to form. A network. A group of ranchers, farmers, and landowners who could stand together when the next HOA tried to push them around. People who had each other's backs. A few weeks later, the Clear Ridge Heights HOA issued a half-hearted public apology. It was late, almost too late. They tried to sweep it under the rug, posting it at 2 a.m. when they thought no one was watching. But the damage had already been done. People had already heard the truth. They couldn't take back what had happened. As for Evan Wells, he resigned from his position as HOA president. Word got out that no developer in Austin wanted to work with him. His name was Mud. But the real victory wasn't just about Evan or the HOA. It was about the land. The fight had been for something far more important than a fence. It was about standing firm and protecting what you believe in, no matter the cost. One evening, a few months later, I walked the fence line, Rex by my side. The sun was setting in a blaze of gold, casting long shadows over the pasture. The air felt different now, lighter, freer. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the land had settled beneath my feet, like it had dug its roots deeper into the earth, and I was a part of something bigger than just myself. And I knew that no matter what came next, this place, this land was mine, and no HOA would ever take it from me.